What is a toxic relationship really? And how do you know you're in one? And if so, what do you do about it? A toxic relationship is not necessarily the same as a relationship where there's conflict. Let's just take a couple, for example, two people that are in a committed, intimate relationship. There are times when the two of them will have a difficult time connecting with each other and may argue and fight, but it isn't necessarily toxic if both partners are trying to connect. Both partners are trying to see their own part in this, even though there may be some disagreement in that. And both partners are really interested in the well-being of the other. Because what that says, if those things are true, then both partners are actually seeking a healthy relationship. They want to be there for their partner. They're willing to look at their own stuff, but the way in which the two are communicating is creating this disconnection that's pulling the two of them apart. That's a troubled relationship, but that's not a toxic relationship. A toxic relationship is very different. A toxic relationship is one where one partner does not have the ability to reflect on or have any introspection on themselves, are not pretty out of touch or dissociated with their own emotions, even though they may express them. They may have extreme anger and be manipulative and judgmental and all of that, but they don't really have good awareness of what is happening in here. You see this in relationships where one person is a narcissist or antisocial or histrionic or has one of what we call the cluster B personality disorders. One of the basic characteristics of those kind of personality disorders is this inability to reflect on our own emotional experience and to communicate that. It's like that connection is not there. And so what ends up happening is that because one partner cannot participate in a collaborative way, it is up to the other partner to do all of the emotional work of the relationship, often to their own detriment. And I use the word toxic in a not necessarily to imply that the person who is a narcissist is inherently a bad person, because oftentimes they have experienced trauma themselves. Most addictions, most personality disorders, and all of that come from a history of trauma. The difference is that where most people who have experienced some emotional trauma have awareness of their own woundedness, even if they can't remember everything that happened. Sometimes they can, or sometimes we can, remember everything that happened to us, but sometimes there's huge gaps where we don't even remember, like periods of our childhood, or we might not remember particular events that may have woundedness, but we do have this awareness of what we are feeling in here, right? Where somebody who is what I'll call toxic, because they're toxic to a relationship, does not have that ability. And so what ends up happening is that the other partner has to distort themselves in order to try to keep that relationship intact. And so oftentimes the person who is toxic is very, very emotionally manipulative and oftentimes very emotionally unhealthy, where the other partner starts really experiencing an undermining of their own sense of self and an undermining of their sense of worth, their sense of value, their sense of agency, their ability to act. They may start feeling helpless, alone, desperate, and really horrible, like they don't deserve anything. And that is just the consequence of having to distort our own emotional needs in order to try to maintain some emotional stability in the toxic partner. You see this in families all the time, and this is what really differentiates what I would call a functional family from a non-functional family. There's a kind of a saying in couple therapy where we don't necessarily marry our parents, but we marry our family dysfunction. So oftentimes, if we grow up in a home where we never feel heard, we never feel like we matter, we oftentimes end up in committed relationships, adult relationships, where that same kind of dynamic forms. That is, unless we become aware of that pattern and intentionally look and try to establish a different pattern where we can communicate effectively with our partner, and even though it may feel like we are trying something new or going in a different direction, we are looking for we look for partners where they can communicate accurately and also take accountability for their side of the street. We can take accountability for the stuff that we do. We can work collaboratively and communicate collaboratively. Right? That's the goal. And toxic relationships are tricky because sometimes when we grow up in that environment and we find ourselves in a toxic environment in adulthood, there's like this odd attraction to that. There's almost this sense of, if I can just get you to respond to me in a healthy way, then it's like, then we can repair. But the ability to repair with a toxic parent or a toxic partner, even though it's something that will oftentimes keep us emotionally engaged, rarely happens unless that person has some kind of watershed moment where they, suddenly have a moment of clarity and they're like, "Oh my God, I have really been an unhealthy person, and I need to fix this, and I'm not sure how." You sometimes see that when people suddenly acknowledge that they have an addiction. For so long, they just deny it, and they keep engaging in it, and then there's this moment of clarity where they're like, "Oh my God, I'm an addict," and they're able to see that, and then at that point, there's the ability to start repairing. And unfortunately, it just usually doesn't happen. And so the question for a lot of people is, what do you do about that? If you're in a toxic relationship with a parent or a partner, what do you do about that? That answer is different for everybody. There's oftentimes a lot more difficulty separating, just cutting ties with a family that is toxic. People do it all the time, though, because to remain engaged oftentimes is so hurtful and just continues to wound that it's just not worth it. Another option when it comes to family, and this is something that I talk to a lot of people about, is that if you can disconnect the emotional connection with the parents or siblings or uncle or whoever it is that's very toxic, then still showing up to family functions, still sending birthday cards, still like being active with the family can be done without it being so emotionally hurtful, right? So one of the big ways of doing that, and this is a tough thing to do, and in my other videos I'll be talking much more about this idea of forgiveness. But it's really about forgiving them for being flawed. It is essentially getting to the place where you can just take that hook, that emotional hook from them out, and just say, "I forgive you for being a flawed human being. I can have compassion for you, but I am no longer seeking anything from you. I can't continue to seek something from you that you are unable to provide because it continues to wound me. And the most effective way that I've found that is through forgiving them for being imperfect people and just allowing any expectation, allowing that sense of connection and that longing for, for something that they can't provide, for us to dissipate, to just hand back to them in a way. And you can do that through forgiveness. So clearly there's a lot more to to being able to evaluate and navigate through toxic relationships. But I hope that just the discussion that we had today was valuable, and I will see you in the next video.